Clive Coutinho, and I'm a holistic and a wellness life coach at Coutinho's Holistic Healing Systems. I also work with Deepika, who is the head of our gut health program, and I assist her with the emotional well-being aspects of the clients that come to us. Now, the reason for this is because we like to, as always, we provide a very integrative and a holistic approach to all of our clients, irrespective of the kind of the disease that they come to us with. But more so with the gut. Why? Because you might have heard of the gut-brain axis, or as it's more commonly referred to as the gut-brain connection, which is why as a life coach, I help to look at what is disturbing or what's causing the emotional well-being of our clients to be in a state of turmoil, if at all there is any particular reason that directly is contributing to the condition of their gut. Most of the gut issues and the diseases always have an emotional link to the reason that their gut is upset in the first place, or as to why their gut has been affected for a long period of time and why it's gotten worse over a period of time. Now, today is International Grief Day, and that's exactly what I'm here to speak about. A little bit on what grief is, what an ideal grieving process looks like, and what are the things that we need to understand about grief, and more so, what can we do about it in order for us to fully, or at least be well aware of how we can deal with it when grief does hit us. And like I said, also to keep in mind that if we don't take the right steps, or we're not fully into the entire grieving process wholeheartedly, in the long run, there are chances that it will affect our gut. It is going to disrupt our basic functioning of our gut health, and it isn't something that's irreversible. It definitely is, but again, depending on the significance of our loss, on the quality of our grieving process, that will go a long way into deciding whether or not our gut issues are going to stay, or we can, in the right manner, get rid of them and deal with them effectively. So let's come to grief, and let's dive a little bit into that. So what is it? Grief is a natural and a normal response to loss. It's the emotional suffering that we feel when something or someone is taken away from us. Something or someone that we particularly love is taken away from us. Now, we can experience all kinds of difficult and unexpected emotions that come with grief, from shock to disbelief to anger to frustration to profound sadness to disbelief, and a host of other emotions that come along with it. Now, the pain of grief, it disrupts not just our physical health, but also our mental health. It literally makes it, that much more difficult to eat, to sleep, or to just think straight. These are normal reactions. These are normal responses to the loss of someone or something. And the more significant the loss is, the more intense our grief is going to be. Now, mostly we associate grief with the loss of a loved one, which is actually the cause of the most intense type of grief, which is called complicated grief. But I'm going to come to that a little later when I speak on the types of grief. But grief isn't only about, or rather brought on by the loss of a loved one. There are a host of other instances or situations that can bring us a lot of grief. For example, if you suffer a miscarriage, or a loved one's terminal illness, the death of a pet, a breakup, a divorce, loss of friendship, loss of financial stability, loss of a cherished dream, loss of a job, or retirement as well, even the loss of safety that is associated with various types of trauma. So these are all different examples of what grief is, and what, or rather how it can sort of come into our lives if we are not fully aware of what's happening, or rather how we mindfully live our lives on a day-to-day basis. Now, grieving a loss, grieving the entire sort of process of grief, eventually we've got to get into it. And why? Because it's important for a host of reasons. Number one is it allows us to free up energy that is bound to the lost person or the object or the experience. Now, why is this? Because we are able to, or we arrive, or we come up with that ability to reinvest that energy elsewhere in matters that really make a difference into our life. Now, and until and unless we are fully or completely and effectively grieving, we are going to find it more likely to reinvest that energy in a much more difficult manner, the caged up energy. Why? Because it's become, it's sort of tying us down to that particular person or the experience or the object. Now, whatever our loss might be, we've also got to remember that it's personal to us, which is why this is another reason why we've got to actively get into grieving when it does hit us. So we shouldn't have to, or we mustn't, I should say, we mustn't have to feel ashamed for how we feel or how we're dealing with it, for a very simple reason. The significance of the loss and the meaning or the understanding of that particular loss is something that is unique only to us. Only we can ever truly understand that. We can empathize, yes, we can do that with people, with loved ones and family and friends, but and this, people can do that with us too. But fully understanding the dynamics and the length or the weight of that loss is something that only we can understand, only we will relate to, which is why we've got to actively deal with it in the best manner possible for us to effectively come out of it. Now, having said this, grieving is not about forgetting, nor is it about drowning ourselves in tears. Healthy grieving is the ability to remember the importance of our loss, but with a newfound sense of peace, rather than some insufferable or excruciating pain. This is growth. This is when grief is helping us to move forward. This is when grief, ironically, for whatever it consists of and the nature of its being, is also on our side. It's here to help us actually get through the process, of course by going through the stages, but to also understand that if we don't go through those stages, it's always going to be there at some point. It's probably going to come back in much more uglier manners in the future, which is why it's here to help us. So long as we understand it, we work with it. It's going to help us move forward rather than just keeping us stuck. So with this now, we actually come to the process of grief. Like, what is an ideal way to deal with it? What is the procedure or the SOP that we sort of need to be knowing about when it comes to grief? So number one, it's a highly individual experience. Okay, there isn't any right or wrong way with how you or someone deals with grief. How we grieve depends on a number of factors. Just our basic personality, our coping style, our life experiences, our upbringing, and of course, most importantly, the significance of the particular loss that has fallen upon us. Now, no two people will sort of ever grieve in the same manner, so it's hard to really ask a lot of questions or try to copy or relate to how someone's recently been through some grieving process or try to take tips and suggestions. Yes, that comes under empathizing when people give us help or offer us ways of how we can deal with it. But eventually we've got to understand that it is unique to us. We've got to develop, we've got to find out our own and the most effective ways of us dealing with that grief in order for us to move forward. The way we think, the way we feel, the way our body reacts and responds, the way we interact with others. These are all various ways of how we're going to get affected when grief hits us. So, which is why it makes it that much more of a very subjective experience. Inevitably, the process is going to take time. This is something that we all have to understand and accept. Healing is not going to happen just like that. It can't be forced, it can't be hurried neither. Some will feel better in weeks, some in months, and some will take years to feel better. But whatever the grieving experiences is, it's imperative for us to be patient with the entire process and let it unfold naturally, because that is how we are fully going to be able to deal with it and come out of it effectively. So this brings us to our next part of the conversation, which talks about a few myths that I'd like to debunk when it comes to a grief. Myth number one: the pain will go away if you ignore it. Clearly not. Trying to ignore it or forcefully suppress it is further worsening the process. We've got to understand that it's necessary to face it and actively deal with it. Myth number two: it's important to stay strong in the face of loss. See, feeling sad, feeling frightened, feeling fearful, feeling lonely, these are very natural responses to grief. Crying isn't a weakness, it's a cathartic release. What does cathartic mean? Cathartic refers to anything that provides psychological relief through the expression of very strong emotions. Okay, so crying, any form of crying, is a cathartic release, and it isn't a weakness. We need to, we don't need to put on a brave face, for everyone, for ourselves or for family and people around for the sake of it. We need to be equipped with showing our true feelings. Why? Because it eventually helps not just us but even the people around us. Myth number three: if you don't cry, you're not sorry enough about the loss. Crying is just, again, like I said, it's one of the responses to grief. Those who don't necessarily cry, let me tell you that they feel the pain just as much, just as deeply as those who do cry. And secondly, there are a number of other ways for people to show their pain or their grief. So we've got to remember that if we are not crying, it doesn't have to mean that we should feel that we're not actually sorry about our loss. Myth number four: grief generally lasts for about a year. No, there is no time frame for this. There is no set duration for how long grief should last. It really is very again subjective, but most importantly, it depends on the significance of the loss and what exactly or who exactly has been lost around here. And myth number five: moving on with life means forgetting about your loss. Moving on doesn't mean forgetting. Moving on means that we've accepted our loss. Remember, there's a very big difference between acceptance and forgetting. They're two entirely different concepts. It's not the same as forgetting. I mean, we can move on, but we can still keep the memory of what we've lost, the object or the experience or the person, as a memory with us. Now, this helps because as we actually continue to go through the stages of our life, these memories actually play a long way into a very integral part into how we define the kind of people we are, how we evolve to become the kind of people that we are meant to be, that we are meant to be evolving into. So remember, memories, holding on to them, actually, depending of course on the kind of person you are, does provide a lot of beneficial and psychological factors over there to consider as well. Now, I want to talk about the types of grief. This is something that most of us aren't fully aware of, but it's important to know about this because it helps us to fully understand what grief really is all about. And sometimes, if it hasn't hit us yet, and it's hit a close friend or a family member or a colleague, it helps when we understand what grief they could possibly be going through and what are the various ways that we could help them in. But before that, let me touch on the symptoms of grief. This again is important and vital for us to know so that we are able to sort of differentiate between what's happening with us when we're in the stage of grief, whether it's emotionally or physiologically. So grief isn't just an emotional process. It also includes a lot of physical reactions and responses that our body is subjected to. Emotionally speaking, we go through symptoms like shock, disbelief, anger, fear, then a lot of guilt, and of course, a profound sadness. When it comes to the physical symptoms, this would include nausea, insomnia, weight loss, weight gain, fatigue, overeating or even undereating, body aches and pains, and even a lowered immunity. So when you put all of these together, we get a better understanding of what our body is going through and what we need to do accordingly to deal with it or to manage it, if not sort of immediately, if you're not able to find ways of dealing with it right then and there. Now coming back to the types of grief. So number one is we've got anticipatory grief. The name itself should give you an idea of what that is. This develops way before a significant loss actually occurs rather than after. So for example, if a loved one is terminally ill, or if you have an aging pet, for example. Like conventional grief though, this can involve a mix of very confusing emotions, but particularly anger in this case, in anticipatory grief as compared to conventional grief. Anticipatory grief though does give us opportunities of how we can prepare ourselves, what we need to do. So for example, if we what we need to do in terms of dealing with the loss is what I meant. So for example, resolving any unfinished businesses or saying a simple goodbye. Maybe one is not going to be enough, but we could probably start that process with having to develop that ability to step forward and indirectly start the process of saying goodbye to somebody. Forgiveness, again, this gives us a lot of room and scope for forgiveness if that's something that's been in the back of our minds, or it's something that's been a part of our life but we've been ignoring it for a long period of time. So this is the scope that comes with anticipatory grief. Then we come to disenfranchised grief. What does this mean? This occurs when our loss is devalued, it's stigmatized, or it cannot be openly mourned. So for example, you may feel stigmatized if you suffer a miscarriage, or if you lose a loved one to suicide. This grief can also occur when your relationship with the deceased is not recognized. So for example, as a close friend or a same-sex partner, you may be denied the sympathy and the understanding as compared to a blood relative. So this makes it more difficult to come to terms with the loss and subsequently to navigate the grieving process as well. And the third one is complicated grief. Complicated grief is simply the grief that happens with the or which comes up with the loss of a loved one. It's simple. We're just not unable to accept the loss of a loved one. We look for them in familiar places. We experience intense longing. We sometimes even feel it's not worth living anymore, simply because we just can't come to terms with that person being taken away from us. Now, the pain that comes with this grief mostly lasts for a long period of time, but eventually, yes, if we are able to go through the entire grieving process effectively and consciously, eventually that pain does go away. But what happens is, when this pain comes up every now and then and it begins to disrupt our daily lives and prevents us from just functioning as normal individuals, this is when we need to seek help. We need to get that support, be it from professionals or whoever, in order for us to really look at the healing process and what it is we need to be doing in order for us to fully come to terms with this kind of grief. Now, what we come to is, what can we actually do to deal with grief, and what are the various other things that come to mind when something like this hits us? Like, the questions are always, okay, it's here, but what are we going to be needing to do? What can I start doing right away? If at all we're very conscious of that fact that we need to be doing something while also grieving and mourning. So there are two ways to look at this. One is to seek support, and the second one is to keep in mind our self-care, looking after ourselves in the best manner possible while we get through this grieving process. Now, while sharing our loss with family, close ones, relatives, etc., can lighten the burden that we are carrying, it doesn't necessarily mean that every time friends and family are around, we have to talk about our loss. No. Sometimes just the presence of people who care about us can bring in a lot of comfort. The idea here is to avoid isolation, to avoid putting yourself into a shell and just thinking that we can deal with it by ourselves. Healthy grieving is an active process. Now, it's so common for us to hear, and sometimes we've said it ourselves to others who are grieving, which is, you just need to give it time. Now, this isn't always true, and sometimes it can come across very differently for the person who is grieving. One way of understanding the work that needs to be done is by thinking of grieving as a series of tasks that need to be done. So I'm going to list out 4 tasks over here. This doesn't have to be done in order particularly, but so long as we're actively working on each of them, that's an excellent start. And it goes a long way into the entire process of grieving that we're eventually going to be getting through. So number 1 is to accept the finality of the loss, to fully come to peace, to fully accept what's happened, and more importantly, that this cannot be changed. Okay, that's what finality of loss particularly refers to. Number 2 is to fully accept, to fully acknowledge, and more importantly, to fully express the full range of emotions that we're going to be feeling and experiencing as a result of this loss. Number 3 is adjusting to the new life, to our new life, in which the person we've lost, or the object, or the experience is absent. So we've got to now, because a lot changes, right? I mean, we're talking about our lives over here. Our life goes through massive amounts of changes. So we've got to start making adjustments, or rather the right kind of changes, in order to adjust to this new life of ours. And finally, the 4th and the most important is learning or being able to say goodbye. goodbye to what's happened, who's lost, what's been lost, a person or an object or an experience. Not just a simple goodbye, but trying to ritualize this entire shift, trying to ritualize our transcendence from what's been lost to a newfound peace with that loss. You see, that's very important even on very spiritual levels, which goes a long way into how we heal eventually. We've got to ritualize that moment. We've got to accept it. We've got to come to peace with it. We've got to take in all that comes with it, from memories, remembering the past, the good times, the bad times, to being able to now sit with it, accept it, and live with it, even if it's just going to be memories, which is what it is all going to be about, memories. So we've got to ritualize that transcendence from the loss to our newfound peace with that loss. And finally, what we can look at are the self-care routine that we should ideally be engaged in order for us to effectively get through this grieving process. And what are some of the things that we can obviously do to start off with is acknowledging and actively facing the situation, dealing with our feelings, avoiding isolation, expressing our feelings in very creative or tangible ways. For example, like journaling. Writing is a very healing process again. Maintaining our hobbies and interests. This is very important so we don't fully disconnect from the kind of, from the life that we were otherwise living. Being vocal about our needs. Taking comfort in prayer. This is very important. Looking after our physical health on all levels. Accepting help and support when it is offered to us. Then identifying triggers and being prepared for that. A trigger could mean an anniversary or a birthday or a family get together. Such events could trigger such emotions. So, being aware of this and knowing what it is that we can do to deal with that. Joining a support group if you need to. Choosing our entertainment very carefully. The kind of music we listen to, the kind of movies or series we watch. These are very powerful in triggering or bringing up strong emotions all over again. And finally, one of the most important things that we could keep in mind is avoiding any new responsibilities or making any major changes in our life, whether it's shifting to a new place or remarrying or raising bringing a child into your family, a new child or a second one or a third one, whatever the case might be. These are major changes in our life that are going to require us to be at our optimal performance. So we've got to be careful we don't, just step into those things thinking that it's going to distract us or take our minds off the grieving process if we haven't already fully come to terms with it. Right? So this is basically what grief is and what it's like, what the process is like, the kinds of grief and what it is that we can work on, what are the various different things that we can do, because for the simple reason, if we are not able to fully deal with it or come to terms with it, like any other suppressed emotions, it is going to come back at some point in our lives, and it's probably going to come back in uglier manners, and which is going to make it twice or thrice as hard for us to deal with it when it does come up then. So I hope this, these insights on grief here has brought about a better understanding of what we can do and why we need to do the work and why it's important for us, particularly when it comes to our gut health, if at all our gut health isn't already compromised, and also to avoid our gut from getting compromised if we are not dealing with it in the right way. I hope this video has been helpful, and I will be attaching a link as well to a couple of articles that I'd like you to go through if at all you would like to further read on grief. The links will be down in the caption below. And that's it from my end. I do hope you'll have a lovely day. Thank you.